Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to the McLarty Treasure Museum, which if you were here for the month of May, you will remember I was going around looking for historical markers near where I live in Melbourne, Florida. And I drove all the way down South A1A, about 34 miles from where I live, to find a historical marker, not knowing it was located at a museum that was actually closed for the day. So it's kind of been in the back of my head that it all worked out for the best because I didn't have time to check out the museum that day anyway. And today I finally get to check this marker off my list, and we're going to go check out this treasure museum. I don't exactly know the whole story. I believe it happened in the 1700s that a fleet of about a dozen Spanish ships sank after they left the Florida coast, headed back for Spain. And I want to learn the whole story, share it with you, and then see what kind of artifacts we can go check out at this McLarty Museum. So come on, it's that way, let's go.
The McLarty Treasure Museum is located on North Hutchinson Island near Vero Beach, Florida, at the north end of Indian River County. The museum occupies part of the former site of the survivors and salvagers camp from a fleet of Spanish ships that were destroyed in a hurricane in 1715. Today, the land is part of the Sebastian Inlet State Park. The museum houses exhibits on the history of the 1715 Spanish fleet and features artifacts, displays, and an observation deck that overlooks the Atlantic Ocean. The property for the museum was donated to the state of Florida by Mr. Robert McLarty, a retired attorney who lives in Vero Beach. There is a ton of information online about these shipwrecks, and if you type 1715 Spanish shipwrecks on the Treasure Coast of Florida into your Google search bar, you will find much more information than I'm going to give in this video. I am reading from an August 2018 article by John DeBay, which I have linked below because I really liked his narrative of this story. The article is titled, "A Concise History of the 1715 Spanish Plate Fleet." With some regularity, two fleets of ships, called flotas, traveled between Spain and the Americas. The Flota de Tierra Firme from Spain to Cartagena and Panama, and the Flota de Nueva España towards Veracruz. Sometimes these two fleets traveled together all the way to the Caribbean. However, the return voyage was far more dangerous. On return, the galleons would be fully loaded with precious cargoes of gold, silver, jewelry, tobacco, spices, indigo, etc. The crews were tired and often plagued by health problems brought on by tropical diseases, malnutrition, and the deplorable hygienic conditions on board. These conditions made the ships even more vulnerable to attacks by pirates. But the greater danger came from an uncontrollable element, the weather. The weather conditions were generally more favorable during the summer months when the waters of the Atlantic Ocean were calmer and the prevailing winds were then more gentle. However, the very warm waters of the South Atlantic contributed to unstable weather and to the then unpredictable, rapid development of violent and devastating tropical storms called hurricanes. As a result of France's King Louis XIV and his policies of expansionism, Europe was ravaged by two major wars between 1688 and 1715. These wars disrupted trade between the Americas and the Old Continent, and Spain, highly dependent on the riches of the New World to finance her own policies of expansionism in Europe, suffered greatly. The first of these wars, called the War of the Grand Alliance, ended in 1697, but in 1701 another war broke out, this time over the succession of the Spanish crown. Carlos II had died childless, but on his deathbed had named as his heir Philippe, the grandson of Louis XIV of France. Leopold I, the Holy Roman Empire, wanted to see his son Archduke Charles ascend to the throne, and he did not take kindly to this decision. Leopold also wanted to prevent at all cost any close alliance between France and Spain. War broke out with England and the Dutch on one side and Spain, France, Portugal, Bavaria, and Savoy on the other. The seas and oceans became the scene of naval battles and vicious encounters between merchant vessels and privateers. The sea routes between Spain and the Americas were no longer safe, and the vital flow of New World treasure was practically stopped. Things were going badly for young Philip V and his kingdom. In the year 1702, Spain received a tremendous blow when a large English naval force entered Vigo Bay on the northwestern coast of Spain. An all-out battle ensued, with the English sinking a number of warships, capturing other ships, and seizing goods and treasure. The English sank another Spanish treasure ship in 1708 and captured another. In 1711, another one of Philip's ships was destroyed by a hurricane off the coast of Cuba. The War of Succession came to a close in 1715 by a series of treaties known as the Peace of Utrecht. The treaty between England and France confirmed Philip V's succession to the throne of Spain, while Philip renounced his rights to the French throne. England was given Newfoundland, the island of St. Christopher, and the Hudson Bay Territory. Although the war had ended, the peace was an uneasy one, and much friction remained between the former foes. Toward the end of this period of hostilities, Spain was in dire need of financial relief. At the king's order, a fleet was dispatched to America in order to bring back urgently needed gold and silver, which had been accumulating during the war. The 11 ships making up the fleet assembled in Havana, Cuba in the summer of 1715. The fleet was made up of the Escuadrón de Tierra Firme, which served the South American trade routes out of Cartagena, and of the Flota de Nueva España, which served the trade of Mexico and Manila galleons out of Veracruz on the southeastern coast of present-day Mexico. A French warship called the Griffon, under the command of Captain Antoine d'Air, also sailed with the Spanish fleet. It was on an official mission to Veracruz to collect 48,801 pieces of 8. I didn't know what a piece of 8 was, but a quick Google search says it means a silver coin equal to a Spanish dollar. These pieces of 8 were monies due by royal decree from the King of Spain to pay for the service of 2 ships, the Apollon and the Triton. The crew was busy getting ready for the long and treacherous journey back to Spain in the summer of 1715. Additional cargo was loaded, inventories were taken, fresh water and victuals were placed aboard each ship. Despite a 2-year delay, the mighty fleet was ready to sail home to Spain in the summer of 1715. The squadron of Tierra Firme consisted of 6 vessels. The Capitan was in direct command of the Capitano, or the flagship, which was a captured English ship, formerly known as the Hampton Court, which was laden with a great number of chests of silver coins, gold bars, gold dust, and jewelry, as well as tropical organic products. The flagship of the Admiral, the Almirante, was equally richly laden. The Nuestra Señora de la Concepción carried gold coins and gold bars, as well as a number of chests of silver coins. The frigate Señor San Miguel, the El Ciervo, and the Patache, which is a small merchant vessel, completed the squadron. The 5 ships of the New Spain flota were under the command of General Don Juan Esteban de Ubilla. Ubilla was himself on the Capitana, which carried some 1,300 chests containing 3 million silver coins. There were also gold coins, gold bars, silver bars, and jewelry, as well as emeralds, pearls, and precious Chinese export porcelain, which had been brought to Mexico by the Manila galleons. The Almiranta carried nearly 1,000 chests of silver coins, each individual chest containing some 3,000 coins. The Refuerzo contained 81 chests of silver coins and over 50 chests of worked silver. Another ship, the Patache, carried some 44,000 pieces of 8. 1 frigate helped complete the flotilla. The 5 ships of the New Spain flota were under the command of General Don Juan Esteban de Ubilla. Ubilla was himself on the Capitana, which carried some 1,300 chests containing 3 million silver coins. There were also gold coins, gold bars, silver bars, and jewelry, as well as emeralds, pearls, and precious Chinese export porcelain which had been brought to Mexico by the Manila galleons. The Almiranta carried nearly 1,000 chests of silver coins, each individual chest containing some 3,000 coins. The Refuerzo contained 81 chests of silver coins and over 50 chests of worked silver. Another ship, the Patache, carried some 44,000 pieces of eight. One frigate helped complete the flotilla. The fleet had suffered many delays and had been sitting idle for nearly 2 years. Pressure had been mounting for the fleet to go ahead and set sail. The Spanish crown was in dire need of money. Under tremendous pressure from back home, Ubilla made the decision to start the long and perilous voyage back to the Old World, even though the hurricane season had long since already begun for the year. This decision would prove to be fatal, for unknown to the Spaniards, a tremendous and exceptionally powerful hurricane was brewing to the southeast of Cuba. The great treasure fleet of 1715 set sail from the harbor in Havana, Cuba, in the early morning of July 24th, which was a beautiful and calm day. A gentle breeze helped the ships find the Florida current, called the Gulf Stream. Slowly and smoothly, the ships of Ubilla's fleet gently followed the east coast of Florida, staying far enough away from the shore to take advantage of the Gulf Stream and staying clear of the treacherous shoals and reef formations which fringed the Florida coast. For the first 5 days, the voyage was uneventful, with the weather remaining good and giving no indication whatsoever of the rapidly approaching killer storm. But on July 29th, long swells started to appear, coming from the southeast. The atmosphere became heavy with moisture, although the sun continued to shine brightly through the haze. A gentle breeze still blew, and the sea was smooth, but the swells started to make the ships gently dip and roll. Experienced navigators, pilots, and old hands started to be concerned. They knew that these were the early signs of an impending tropical storm. The storm was traveling north, almost due east of the convoy, but still many miles away. The storm had reached alarming intensity, with winds at the center of the storm now reaching 100 miles an hour. By nightfall, the hurricane had made a drastic change in course, suddenly veering off directly to the west. On the morning of July 30th, along the east coast of Florida, just south of Cape Canaveral, winds had begun to pick up and by midday had increased to well over 20 knots. By late afternoon, winds had increased to over 30 knots, and the waves were reaching 20 feet. Ubilla's fleet was relentlessly driven closer and closer to shore. The general gave the order that all ships head into the wind in order to stay well clear of the reef and shoals, but the attempt was only marginally successful. The velocity of the winds kept increasing, and by midnight the ships were barely under control. Around 4 o'clock in the morning on July the 31st, the hurricane struck the doomed ships with all of its might, driving one ship after another onto the deadly jagged reefs. The ships broke apart like wooden toys. Ubilla's Capitana disintegrated, crushed on the reef. Almost all on board were killed, including Ubilla. The entire fleet was lost, and of the around 2,500 persons aboard the various ships, well over 1,000 perished. The only ship that survived the storm was a French ship called the Griffon. Captain Dare had made the decision to head towards the northeast and directly into the storm earlier. He arrived on the coast of Brittany on August 31st, completely unaware that all of the Spanish ships had perished. For those who had miraculously survived the storm, the ordeal was only just beginning. Survivors of the destroyed fleet established a camp at this location while awaiting rescue. The McLarty Treasure Museum occupies part of the land where they set up their survival camp. They were stranded in an inhospitable land infested with disease-carrying mosquitoes, rattlesnakes, wild animals, and hostile Indians. They were far away from any settlement, and they had no food, fresh water, or badly needed medical supplies. When daylight came on the dreadful morning of July 31st, 1715, the full extent of the disaster could be seen. The beaches of La Florida were littered with wreckage and bodies. The survivors attempted to find out what their exact location even was. However, the 11 ships had wrecked at different locations, and they were separated sometimes by miles, making it impossible to fully assess the extent of the disaster. Stranded in this inhospitable land without food, water, or supplies, many more of the survivors died each and every day, adding to the already devastating number of casualties. Admiral Don Francisco Salmon began immediately surveying the extent of the damage. Some of the wreck sites were visible because portions of the ships could be observed protruding above the water at low tide. At least 11 of the flotas were missing, including 2 vessels that had been completely lost from sight at least 36 hours before the sinking of the entire fleet. After deducing that probably all of the ships had been wrecked, he decided on August 6th to send Ubilla's pilot and 18 crewmen in a launch towards the island of Cuba to give alert and to send a personal message to the governor. It took 11 days for their small boat to reach Havana. Within a few days, several ships were leaving the Havana harbor loaded with emergency supplies, salvage equipment, government officials, and soldiers headed to the east coast of Florida. Salvage began as soon as the relief expedition reached the survivors' camp. Success came early as salvage sloops dragged the ocean floor for wreckage and quickly brought up chests of coins, as well as jewelry and gold. The Havana salvage flotilla was soon joined by Florida ships sent from St. Augustine to help in the recovery effort. By early September, such was the success of the salvage team that Admiral Salmon wrote to the governor asking him to send 25 soldiers and ammunition to guard the king's treasure, as well as private properties that had been salvaged from the various shipwrecks. By the time the weather and sea conditions had become unsuitable for continuing salvage in late October of that year, over 5 million pieces of 8 had been recovered along with gold, jewelry, and a great part of the king's treasure. Although salvage was essentially completed, efforts continued well into 1718. News of the disaster had swept the Americas and Europe, and privateers, pirates, and looters converged towards Palmar de Ace, which is today Sebastian Inlet, like ravenous vultures. Early in January 1716, pirates Henry Jennings and John Wills, both commissioned by the governor of Jamaica, attacked the Spanish salvage camp at Palmar de Ace and detained the defenders while looting the camp. No casualties were reported, but they made off with some 120,000 pieces of 8 and other valuables, as well as 2 bronze cannons and 2 large iron guns. When the Spaniards abandoned the salvage camp in 1718, great treasure still remained at the bottom of the ocean floor. For years after the official completion of the salvage operation, merchant ships sailing these waters would fish around for treasure. Little by little, the sites faded from memory, and the great 1715 Spanish fleet would eventually be forgotten and left undisturbed for nearly 250 years, until in 1960, when the modern age of treasure hunting was ushered in by the Real 8 Corporation. Their recoveries of the 1715 fleet treasure are told in a book written by Kip Wagner called Pieces of 8. To this day, beachcombers and amateur treasure hunters quite often find old coins, pieces of pottery, and jewelry up and down the Treasure Coast of Florida. Not a single known 1715 fleet shipwreck has been identified securely. Names have been attributed to the ships as they have been found, mostly by treasure hunters, based on the amount of gold, silver, jewelry, and other artifacts found on the site. We now know that at least 3 of the ships were never even found by the Spaniards, including Ubilla's small frigate that he bought in Havana, and 2 ships believed to have been part of the Tierra Firme fleet. Treasure hunter and author Robert Weller assigned names to the shipwrecks, but it should be emphasized that his naming of those wrecks is not based on physical evidence, but instead on personal opinion of the amount of treasure found on each wreck. The questionable identification has been repeated by other writers and amateur historians. The only shipwreck that can be identified with a mild degree of certainty is the cabin wreck, about 2 miles south of the Sebastian Inlet. It was the first wreck discovered and salvaged by Kip Wagner and the Reel 8 Company. Their identification is based on 3 major factors. Number 1, a map drafted in 1774 of the Sebastian River with a notation that opposite this river perished the admiral commanding the fleet 1715. Number 2, numerous archival documents found in Spain and Cuba indicating that General Don Juan Esteban de Abilla died aboard his Capitana across from the Sebastian River, which was then called the Ace River. And number 3, the amount of silver coins, mostly minted in Mexico, found at this particular wreck site in the 1960s. Treasure hunter Kip Wagner's team held an exhibit at National Geographic's Explorers Hall in Washington, D.C. that was featured in the January 1965 issue of the National Geographic magazine. This was the beginning of a fine collection of 1715 fleet treasure that brought hundreds of visitors from around the world. Wagner published his book, Pieces of Eight, Recovering the Riches of a Lost Spanish Fleet, in 1966. This book gives a detailed account of the finding and exploration of many of these shipwrecks along Florida's Treasure Coast. An exhibit was set up with a grand opening on May 1, 1967, at the First National Bank of Satellite Beach in Florida. In 1987, the Urca de Lima became the first shipwreck in the Florida Underwater Archaeological Preserves.
All right, we're on our way to an overlook of the beach where the wreck happened. I can hear the water already. This reminds me of when we went to the Ponce de Leon potential landing site in Melbourne, Florida. I'm still not sure what my opinion is on that. We're not far from there though. I drove right past it coming here. Oh, I just realized we're in a ship. Or their lookout is like a ship. I'm gonna try to read that for you and voice it over. There's... Look. And we're in a boat, or a sort of makeshift one. Let's just stop and enjoy the beach for a little bit, shall we? It's beautiful when the beach is undeveloped. dragonflies. I don't know if you can see all 3 of them, but they're all on the top of these plates. Oh, 4 dragonflies. And I heard the guy inside the museum telling some other people that there are beachcombers out here today looking for a treasure. I don't know if that's the boat he was talking about, but it is kind of right here, you know? So this is where they sank. And not all of them were ever recovered. So that means there's more ships out there still left under the water to be discovered. Isn't that cool? I see a sign right over here. I don't know if that means there is a sea turtle nest there or if it's just to let you know that this is sea turtle nesting area. Here's the boat we're in. Makeshift boat. And the poison, is that the poison symbol? Or pirate? Pirate, I guess that's pirate, isn't it? Okay guys, I think I'm gonna do my outro here because it's so lovely and I just wanna stay outside for a few more minutes. I hope you enjoyed that museum. I really did. I love seeing all those old artifacts. I'm hoping that the footage is stable enough, and I'm not sure about the audio because there were a lot of people in the museum who were talking over one another, plus I was trying to play some of the audio, the narrations where you push the button. So I'm gonna have to work on the audio for this video. It may just be entirely a voiceover. We'll have to see when I get home what I came up with, but I'm gonna go ahead and end it here. I hope you enjoyed this really cool afternoon at the McLarty Treasure Museum, and I kind of want to go to that other one now. I heard there's a second treasure museum that is not too far away, but I don't have time to go today. I'm going to try to go some other day if I can. I really hope you enjoyed this video, guys. I'll see you another day in another adventure. Bye, everybody. Okay, guys, I'm not quite sure how that footage turned out. It's always challenging filming in museums because it's not very brightly lit in there, and plus I was trying to push all of the buttons to get the audio narration, but there were other people in the museum and they were all talking kind of loud, and there was also a tour guide taking some people around, so I'm not really sure yet what I'm going to be able to do with the audio. I hope you were able to see everything as well as I could. Sometimes it's easier for me to go to a museum and film though, because the plaques with all the information, a lot of times I can't read them, so I have to zoom in on my phone anyway, so it just makes it, you know, it's not much extra work just to film what I'm looking at in addition to the sign. So I really enjoyed the lookout. I think it's kind of surreal when you think about the fact that the ocean has kind of always been more or less the same, but all of the things that have happened through the course of time. Right there where I'm standing, it's wild. I really enjoy learning about history, and I really enjoy being at a place where something significant happened like this. So I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. I'll see you another day in another video. Take care. See you soon.